What is up, Steeler fans? Welcome back to another episode of State of the Steelers. I'm your Steel Current Network host, Daniel. And today we're talking about the Pittsburgh Steelers playing some mind games, y'all. And I think that it's that time of year, right? I mean, it's really close to the draft. Nobody wants to let anybody know more or less who it is that they're going to be targeting or drafting. For the Pittsburgh Steelers, though, they kind of have for the last few years, right? There was no surprise with Najee Harris, no surprise with Kenny Pickett. I think there was no really surprise that they were going to go for an offensive tackle or an offensive lineman in the last 2 years. Maybe the players per se weren't the, most obvious in Broderick Jones and Troy Fautanu. I think a lot of people thought that Fautanu was going to end up being gone by the time that the Steelers were picking in last year's draft. But, he ends up falling and he's there and the Steelers pick him up. And I think he's going to be an excellent player for the Pittsburgh Steelers. I know we only saw him in one game last season. However, all reports were he was the most polished offensive lineman throughout training camp, and while he was able and healthy to participate, which would include Zach Frazier, who I thought was an excellent center. So, if he can live up to that, statue there, if he can manage to play at the same level as Zach Frazier has been playing, then I think the Steelers got themselves a guy out there that's going to be the right tackle. So this year it's a little bit different. There's the Steelers have brought in a few players. They've brought in quite a few different players or positions, whether it be quarterback, whether it be receiver, cornerback, a lot of guys that are expected to be in the top 1 or 2 rounds. And well, the Steelers only have one draft pick in the first top 2 rounds, being only one in the first round, none in the second, after they've traded for DK Metcalf. So essentially they they got a receiver there for their second round draft pick. So, you look at these players and maybe perhaps some of these second round players that they're bringing in, like a cornerback Thomas. He's a guy that was projected in the first round, maybe isn't anymore because his speed isn't quite up to where you would expect and or at least would hope for out of a first round draft pick. He might fall to the third round. Maybe the Steelers are targeting him there and they're hoping some of these second round guys are falling, or maybe perhaps they have a plan to move back or do something to get another second round pick. I mean, there's so much that the Pittsburgh Steelers could do. Here recently they brought in Shador Sanders. Now, they've brought in almost every quarterback that you can think of, whether it be outside of Cam Ward, who's expected to go the first overall pick, whether it be Jackson Dart or Tyler Shock, or I think there was another quarterback or two that was brought in as well. And the Steelers met with and went to the Texas Pro Day. They met with Quinn Ewers, et cetera. So, the Steelers are doing their due diligence on quarterback. And I think, well, let's get on the topic of the state of the quarterback position. I thought Aaron Rodgers would be the Pittsburgh Steelers quarterback by the time that we were speaking today. And unfortunately, that's not the case. Some may say that that's not an unfortunate thing. I know there's a few of you folks that don't want Aaron Rodgers on the team. And, I don't disagree. I don't agree. I think that at the end of the day, given the quarterbacks that are available, I'm okay with Mason Rudolph. I like Mason. But, if you're really trying to win a Super Bowl this year, given the quarterbacks that are available, including who would be available in the draft, I'm not certain anybody else outside of Rodgers would be that quarterback that could give you that possibility of getting a ring. Just given the fact that he's got the hardware, he's got 4 MVPs, he's a Super Bowl champ, he's done it before. I know he's had a couple of seasons where they weren't the greatest, and his age is up there, and perhaps maybe there's a one and the other have something to do with each other. The age, meaning being why maybe perhaps he hasn't played as well as he's played previously. I mean, we saw it with Ben Roethlisberger at the end of his career. He was aided by an elbow injury as far as the end of his career, his retirement was, to kind of speed up that process. But at the end of the day, he was still about 40 years old. Most quarterbacks would have hung it up by then. And you can see a difference in his play then and then obviously just a few years earlier. It was almost a pretty stiff cliff that he maybe didn't fall completely down, because I don't think he was a terrible quarterback. I just don't think that he was able to outplay his weaknesses anymore. I mean, perhaps beforehand he was able to get rid of the ball quickly enough and he wasn't taking any hits, but the inability to throw the ball down the field in the manner that he used to, stopped defenses from, sitting back and waiting for the deep ball. And so everything under the, right there was being taken away. And well, the offensive line that they had and his immobility and his age, it just was a formula for disaster. I'm surprised the Pittsburgh Steelers continued to have winning seasons throughout that time frame. But, I digress. With Aaron Rodgers, he's older. He's 40, 41. So he's older than what Ben was when Ben hung it up. And so I wouldn't be hurt if it's not Aaron Rodgers. Let's put it that way. I'm fairly happy with Mason Rudolph. I think Mason Rudolph probably would have done a better job. I dare say I think he would have done a better job last year, than Russell Wilson throughout the entire. If you take, well, yes, I 100% believe that Mason Rudolph would have done a better job than Russell Wilson last season in the Pittsburgh Steelers and in Pittsburgh Steelers uniform. I know he didn't have the numbers out there in Tennessee, and he's never really had those, gaudy numbers to back him up. However, he's always been protective of the ball. I think he had a few interceptions last year, but a lot of those interceptions touched his receiver's hands first, and then were tipped up and bounced in the air. And so, I'm excited to see what he has. If Aaron Rodgers ends up not signing and the Steelers go out and get a rookie quarterback, which I do think they're going to end up drafting a quarterback at some point in this draft. If that ends up being the case, I seriously would like to see Mason Rudolph start this year and let the rookie quarterback develop. I just hope that whoever it is doesn't, impede on the potential plans for a franchise quarterback that could be available next year. I am cautiously speculative about this quarterback class. I'm not saying it's the same as Kenny Pickett's class, or that's what we're looking at, but I am not impressed. I'm not looking at this class and thinking that this is one like, for instance, 2004 when Ben came out. I know there's been a lot of quarterback classes that have happened since then, and some good ones, some bad ones, but that's the one that I remember the most. All right, so I digress. So the Steelers quarterback situation, I would have thought Aaron Rodgers would have signed by now. He has not signed, not yet, at least at the time of this recording. I do think, though, at the end of the day, he will sign. Now, there is some news out there that could put a hamper into it, and the reason why maybe perhaps he was waiting so long, and that is with the New Orleans Saints quarterback Derek Carr. Apparently, he's got some sort of injury with his shoulder, and he may be missing part of the year, if not the entire year. And so the Saints are going to be looking for a quarterback. Now, could that be Aaron Rodgers? Could that be Shedeur Sanders? The Saints are picking at 9. So there's that possibility that, the New Orleans Saints are going to end up picking up a quarterback. Now, to me, the title of the show is called Mind Games. And I think that the Steelers are playing those mind games and smoke and mirrors. Now, I think that Shedeur Sanders is a good quarterback. I think he'll be an okay quarterback in the NFL. I don't know about. There's a few things that concern me. One of them is going to be his arm strength and his ability to throw in the north. And the reason behind that is just, yes, he threw the ball great deep down the field there at his pro day in a controlled area, right? It was in a dome. And so, he was able to throw the ball, but on shorter routes or where he was just trying to put some air under it, just those touch passes, they wobbled a lot. And the accuracy wasn't really there on the underneath stuff. And that's concerning, and for the Steelers, I'm not certain if this is the team that's going to be, the quarterback whisperer team that's going to develop him to be that guy that, the Steelers are wanting at quarterback. And so that's why I'm more hopeful for a guy like Archie Manning, who has the bloodline, so to speak. He's been developing since birth, basically, because of his uncles and his father, who was also an NFL or a football player. He just, didn't have the prolific career as the other brothers because his was end short due to an injury, I believe, in college or something. Well, anywho, he's had that development and training. So I'm not gonna lie. I'm all for planning for Manning. March for Arch, I think, is something some other folks are saying. I've been saying planning for Manning, but Shedeur Sanders, why bring him in then, right? This guy, if the Steelers are going to get him, they're going to get him in the first round. So that says that by bringing him in, the Steelers should be at least somewhat serious about drafting a quarterback in the first round. Maybe. I'm a little bit hesitant, and I'm going to tell you why when we get back after this break. We'll be right back. Don't go anywhere. Hey, welcome back to the show. Glad you could stay with us. Before we get back into the conversation, I want to remind you guys of our website, stillcurrentnetwork.com, your one-stop shop for Pittsburgh Steelers news and coverage. Go check out all the articles that are breaking all the time. You can also check on the top 30 or the 30 draft players that are allowed to be brought into the facility. These are 30 players that are going to be in the draft this upcoming year, that the Steelers can have a formal meeting in Pittsburgh. Shedeur Sanders was one of them. There's a tracker there on Steel Curtain Network. It's up to the minute, up to date. So make sure you go and check that out. All righty. So as the title says, mind games. My opinion when it comes to who the Pittsburgh Steelers are going to draft in the draft here, in 2025 NFL draft in Green Bay is, I think it's going to end up being a wide receiver. I think that it's going to be, and I know I'm going to get a lot of like, hey, well, are they going to trade Pickens? They could. They very well could in the second round. I don't think so, though. I think they're going to end up keeping him. I think Matthew Golden out of Texas is going to be the guy. Now, this is the reason why. Earlier today, when this was recorded, we had Steel Curtain Network, that is, a mock draft that was going on with some of the other platforms on Fans First Sports Network that cover other teams. And obviously, Steel Curtain Network was drafting for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And at that point, a lot of the players had gone off the board. Now, Shedeur Sanders, I believe, was still available. I believe he was still available here, but Matthew Golden was also available. Now, why do I think that this could be some sort of mind game? Well, the Cleveland Browns are drafting 2 overall, and they have the opportunity to draft Travis Hunter. Now, Travis Hunter, in my opinion, is probably the best player coming out of this draft. Now, if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers, if you can throw a wrench into that by making that team think that maybe perhaps you're going to draft Shedeur Sanders before they can draft him at number 33, 34, whatever it is that they're drafting in the second round, well, that might make them decide, well, is the receiver the bigger, question mark that they have for the Browns? Deshaun Watson had a setback on his Achilles, so he's probably not going to play this year. They did sign Joe Flacco for 1 year, which is another option that the Pittsburgh Steelers had Aaron, or if Aaron Rodgers decides not to choose the Pittsburgh Steelers. So that option is also out of question. Are the Browns going to say, all right, is Flacco a sign saying we're still going to get Travis Hunter, even though you guys may end up getting Shedeur? Now, if the Browns love Shedeur Sanders that much and they think he could be their guy, even if they have Travis Hunter over him, I mean, the Browns are the Browns. Who knows? Maybe they end up pulling that trigger. But could this be some sort of way to force the hand? Now, the Saints losing their quarterback and Derek Carr, possibly due to some sort of shoulder injury that could threaten his availability for the season. Could they go out there and draft a Shedeur Sanders? I think so. So this is some added pressure both by the New Orleans Saints and the Pittsburgh Steelers on the Cleveland Browns to make a move. Now, why do I think wide receiver could be the option when the Steelers have already drafted DK Metcalf? They've already traded for DK Metcalf, giving up a second-round draft pick. In essence, this would be drafting 2 wide receivers back-to-back. And I agree that would be the case, but I do think you do have some trade capital there, whether it be Calvin Austin or George Pickens to get back into the second or third round. And I do think that there's this possibility that, especially if Aaron Rodgers has signed with the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, I know a lot of people are going to say, no, you should go defensive line. And I agree there's that possibility, but this is a deep defensive line class. defensive line don't usually go really, really quickly. Now, I do think there's going to be a couple of them that are going to go off the board in the first round, but I do think you're going to have availability in the third or even in the fourth round to pick up a defensive lineman. The reason why you may end up going receiver like Golden is because, one, I think he reminds me a lot of Santonio Holmes and AB. He took a 30-player draft visit, so he was in the building for Pittsburgh. They went to his pro day. They met with him at the combine, and they brought him in. Plus, if things don't work out with George Pickens, you can always trade him during the season next year before the trade deadline, and you probably are going to end up getting quite a bit more for him. Or if you end up trading him after this draft for the season or the draft upcoming, you're going to maximize your possible return. Think of Chase Claypool, for instance. And so I think you can end up getting a second rounder for George Pickens easy in next year's draft if you're in the middle of the season for a team that is dying or hurting for a wide receiver. Now, if the goal is to get the quarterback, the franchise QB next season, well, there's your capital there to move up, right? Because if Golden is doing what he's supposed to be doing, he's progressing. That means that there's probably going to be less balls going to George Pickens. That's just a number game, regardless of who's a quarterback or any of those type of things. You have DK Metcalf. He's wide receiver one. He's the $150 million wide receiver on the outside. He's your wide receiver one. You're not paying him that amount to be wide receiver two. You bring in a Golden who can be your, like I said, your Santonio Holmes style, your AB type wide receiver. You have DK Metcalf, who is that Martavius Bryant to AB. I mean, you might have, a good pair there. Now, I mean, if you're actually going on a run this year, and let's just say all three are being happy and fed and fat and happy and sassy, as Coach Tomlin has said in the past, well, then you have the opportunity to keep all three. It's not like you're paying Golden a ton of money. He's a rookie. And George Pickens is on his last year, et cetera. So if you're on the path for a Super Bowl run when you have all three of these guys, there's nothing saying that you have to trade him, but there's that option there throughout the season to maximize your draft capital. And, and I think that puts you at least in position to trade up in next year's draft, even if you have to give up a numerous amount of picks to go up there and get the quarterback that you want, and make sure that you end up getting that guy. I think that is probably one of, maybe not the only game plan, but I'm hoping that this one ends up working. I'm sure the Pittsburgh Steelers and Omar Khan have several things planned up. They don't invite a Matthew Golden to come in just to come in and talk to him. Maybe perhaps they think he's going to go to a AFC North competitor or something, and they're trying to get, maybe like Shador Sanders, just trying to get to know the guy, talk to him a little bit, see what's up. And in preparations, because they're eventually probably going to end up playing the guy. That's a possibility there. Shador Sanders liked the Pittsburgh Steelers. He came, I think he was out on X on one of these. I think it's Tom Pelissero was talking with him. He said that he understands why the Pittsburgh Steelers win, and he was excited. And he was talking glowingly about the trip that he took to Pittsburgh. And if he ends up being the draft pick, let's just say I'm wrong, right? Let's just say I'm wrong. And at 21, the Steelers select Sanders. I think there's a couple of things that have happened. One, I don't think Aaron Rodgers is on the team. I know that the Steelers have said that, hey, Aaron Rodgers has, whether he's on the team or not, is not going to affect what they're going to do in the draft. And that's quite possible. There's that possibility that, regardless of what he does, that, they're going to draft a quarterback, whether it be in the first round, the third round, the fourth round. Now, I personally think it's going to be later rounds. I personally do, as far as that quarterback position. And I think they're going to have Mason Rudolph and this developmental backup quarterback there until, they're going to give him a shot to see what he has in practice and things of that nature, and in preseason and in training camp. And, to see if he can be somebody that they can develop and not look at a quarterback next year. But all indications to me is that the Pittsburgh Steelers are probably going to be going up to the podium in 2026 in Pittsburgh early. Maybe not necessarily because they played bad, but because they're trading up, I think is a huge possibility. I mean, this comp formula thing that's going on, the compensatory picks. Omar Khan has already said that there's no secret. You guys, he said it's obvious. You guys can tell. You guys being the fans, that everybody can tell what they're doing. What they're doing is they're stockpiling on compensatory picks so that way they can move up in next year's draft. And I think next year's draft is going to be a huge component to what the Pittsburgh Steelers want to do with the wide receiver position. The last thing I want to talk about is TJ Watt. It seems like he's a little bit upset. He put up a social media picture of him throwing the deuces, which means goodbye, peace, whatever. And a lot of folks are saying that maybe perhaps that's an indication that his negotiations aren't going as planned. Myles Garrett ended up getting paid $40 million a year. I still think TJ Watt is a better player than Myles Garrett. I think that the Steelers should have signed him. They should have extended him last year. That should have been what they could have done, and they would have saved themselves quite a bit of money had they done that. I think the longer that they wait, they're going to continue to waste. They're going to continue to make that price tag more expensive. And so I would take care of it now as soon as possible. Get him taken care of, because at the end of the day, the salary cap is continuing to grow. And although it may seem like a large amount of money today, in a couple of years, let's just say the Steelers do draft a quarterback next year and they draft a wide receiver this year in the first round. Well, these guys are expensive players, and so is, for instance, Broderick Jones, if he ends up playing up to his potential, as a left tackle. His pay, he's going to end up, his fifth year is going to come and go, and you're going to have to pay him. And then TJ Watt should, his paycheck, it probably will look like a deal. It won't be so expensive compared to what is being paid to edge rushers at that time. And the salary cap would have exploded even more, and et cetera, et cetera. So the percentage of the salary cap would have been smaller. So at the end of the day, if you have the room to do it today, do it today. I don't think you want to lose a TJ Watt. If there's anybody that's on this team that I think that you're going to end up trading away or anything like that, who could be a surprise, is probably Minkah Fitzpatrick. And I think the writing on the wall is the fact that they have picked up other safeties already. I wouldn't mind that Imawarmi guy. I probably said his name wrong. He's there in the first. I would take him in a heartbeat. I mean, that guy is like middle line. He's like Ryan Shazier as a safety. I mean, huge, big hitting, hard tackling guy. I'd be excited for him. I definitely would be. Well, guys, that's all I got for you guys today. Please hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, ring that notification bell. As soon as Aaron Rodgers says that, he's going to be a Pittsburgh Steeler, or he's not, you're sure to find it here first. So make sure you go and check out the website as well, and everything else in between. With that being said, I'm out of here, guys. Peace.